Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin, born the 7th of October 1952, is a Russian politician and former intelligence officer who is serving as the current president of Russia since 2012, previously being in the office from 1999 until 2008. He was also prime minister from 1999 to 2000 and again from 2008 to 2012. As of 2021, Putin is the second longest-serving European president, after Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus. Putin was born in Leningrad, now Saint Petersburg, and studied law at Leningrad State University, graduating in 1975. Putin worked as a KGB foreign intelligence officer for 16 years, rising to the rank of lieutenant colonel, before resigning in 1991 to begin a political career in St. Petersburg. He later moved to Moscow in 1996 to join the administration of President Boris Yeltsin. He briefly served as director of the Federal Security Service and secretary of the Security Council, before being appointed as prime minister in August 1999. After the resignation of Yeltsin, Putin became acting president, and less than 4 months later was elected outright to his first term as president and was re-elected in 2004. As he was then constitutionally limited to 2 consecutive terms as president, Putin chose to become the prime minister again from 2008 to 2012, and was re-elected as president in 2012, and again in 2018. In April 2021, following a referendum, he signed into law a constitutional change that would allow him to run for re-election twice more, potentially extending his presidency to 2036. During his first tenure as president, the Russian economy grew for 8 straight years, with GDP measured by purchasing power increasing by 72%, real incomes increased by a factor of 2.5, real wages more than tripled, unemployment and poverty more than halved, and the Russians' self-assessed life satisfaction rose significantly. The growth was a result of a 5-fold increase in the price of oil and gas, which constitute the majority of Russian exports, recovery from the post-communist depression and financial crises, a rise in foreign investment, and prudent economic and fiscal policies. Serving under Dmitry Medvedev from 2008 to 2012, he oversaw large-scale military reform and police reform. In 2012, Putin sought a third term as president and won with almost 64% of the vote. Falling oil prices coupled with international sanctions imposed at the beginning of 2014 after Russia's annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbass led to GDP shrinking by 3.7% in 2015, though the Russian economy rebounded in 2016 with 0.3% GDP growth, and the recession officially ended. Development under Putin has included the construction of pipelines, the restoration of the satellite navigation system GLONASS, and the building of infrastructure for international events such as the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi. Putin received 76% of the vote in the 2018 election and was re-elected for a 6-year term ending in 2024. Under Putin's leadership, Russia has experienced democratic backsliding. Experts do not generally consider Russia to be a democracy, citing jailing of political opponents, purges, and the repression and prohibition of a free press, as well as the lack of free and fair elections. Russia has scored poorly on Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index, and Freedom House's Freedom in the World Index. Human rights organizations and activists accuse Putin of persecuting political critics and activists as well as ordering them tortured or assassinated. The United States government has accused him of leading an interference program against Hillary Clinton in support of Donald Trump during the U.S. presidential election in 2016. Early life. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin was born on 7 October 1952 in Leningrad, Russian SFSR, Soviet Union, now St. Petersburg, Russia, the youngest of 3 children of Vladimir Spiridonovich Putin, 1911–1999, and Maria Ivanovna Putina, née Shelemova, 1911–1998. Spiridon Putin, Vladimir Putin's grandfather, was a cook to Vladimir Lenin. Putin's birth was preceded by the deaths of 2 brothers, Viktor and Albert, born in the mid-1930s. Albert died in infancy and Viktor died of diphtheria during the siege of Leningrad by Nazi Germany's forces in World War II. Putin's mother was a factory worker and his father was a conscript in the Soviet Navy, serving in the submarine fleet in the early 1930s. Early in World War II, his father served in the Destruction Battalion of the NKVD. Later, he was transferred to the regular army and was severely wounded in 1942. Putin's maternal grandmother was killed by the German occupiers of Tver region in 1941, and his maternal uncles disappeared on the Eastern Front during World War II. On the 1st of September 1960, Putin started at school number 193 at Boskov Lane, near his home. He was one of a few in the class of approximately 45 pupils who was not yet a member of the Young Pioneer Organization. At age 12, he began to practice Sambo and Judo. Putin studied German at Saint Petersburg High School 281 and speaks German fluently. Putin studied law at the Leningrad State University named after Andrei Zhdanov, now Saint Petersburg State University, in 1970 and graduated in 1975. His thesis was on the most favored nation trading principle in international law. While there, he was required to join the Communist Party of the Soviet Union and remained a member until it ceased to exist. It was outlawed in August 1991. Putin met Anatoly Sobchak, an assistant professor who taught business law, and later became the co-author of the Russian Constitution and of the corruption schemes persecuted in France. Putin would be influential in Sobchak's career in St. Petersburg. Sobchak would be influential in Putin's career in Moscow. Kgb Career. In 1975, Putin joined the KGB and trained at the 401st KGB School in Okhta, Leningrad. After training, he worked in the 2nd Chief Directorate, Counterintelligence, before he was transferred to the 1st Chief Directorate, where he monitored foreigners and consular officials in Leningrad. In September 1984, Putin was sent to Moscow for further training at the Yuri Andropov Red Banner Institute. From 1985 to 1990, he served in Dresden, East Germany, using a cover identity as a translator. Masha Gessen, a Russian-American who has authored a biography about Putin, claims Putin and his colleagues were reduced mainly to collecting press clippings, thus contributing to the mountains of useless information produced by the KGB. According to a later controversial anonymous source cited by journalist Catherine Belton, Putin was allegedly involved in Soviet support for the West German terrorist Red Army faction, mainly active in the 1970s, not in the end of 1980s. During this time, though his residence in Dresden was absolutely non-suitable for such activities and his own activities were focused on Southeast Asia because of his previous connections to such foreigners in the USSR. He met Germans to be recruited for wireless communications affairs together with an interpreter. He was involved in wireless communications technologies in Southeast Asia due to trips of German engineers, recruited by him, there and to the West. According to Putin's official biography, during the fall of the Berlin Wall that began on 9 November 1989, he had saved the files of the Soviet Cultural Center, House of Friendship, and of KGB Villa in Dresden for the official authorities of the would-be United Germany to prevent demonstrators, including KGB and Stasi agents, from obtaining and destroying them. He then supposedly burnt only those files, that were KGB ones, in a few hours, but saved archives of the Soviet Cultural Center for the German authorities. Nothing is told about selection criteria during burning, Stasi files and about files of other agencies of German Democratic Republic and of the USSR. He explained that many documents were left to Germany only because the furnace burst. But many documents of the KGB Villa were sent to Moscow. After the collapse of the communist East German government, Putin was to resign from active KGB service because of suspicions aroused regarding his loyalty during demonstrations in Dresden and earlier, though the KGB and the Soviet Army still operated in Germany, and he returned to Leningrad in early 1990, where he worked for about 3 months with the International Affairs section of Leningrad State University, reporting to Vice-Rector Yuri Molchanov. There, he looked for new KGB recruits, watched the student body, and renewed his friendship with his former professor, Anatoly Sobchak, soon to be the mayor of Leningrad. Putin claims that he resigned with the rank of lieutenant colonel on 20 August 1991, on the second day of the 1991 Soviet coup d'état attempt against the Soviet president Mikhail Gorbachev. Putin said, "As soon as the coup began, I immediately decided which side I was on," although he also noted that the choice was hard because he had spent the best part of his life with the organs. In 1999, Putin described communism as a blind alley, far away from the mainstream of civilization. Political career. 1990 to 1996, St. Petersburg administration. In May 1990, Putin was appointed as an advisor on international affairs to the mayor of Leningrad Anatoly Sobchak. In a 2017 interview with Oliver Stone, Putin said that he resigned from the KGB in 1991, following the coup against Mikhail Gorbachev, as he did not agree with what had happened and did not want to be part of the intelligence in the new administration. On 28 June 1991, he became head of the Committee for External Relations of the mayor's office, with responsibility for promoting international relations and foreign investments and registering business ventures. Within a year, Putin was investigated by the City Legislative Council led by Marina Sale. It was concluded that he had understated prices and permitted the export of metals valued at $93 million in exchange for foreign food aid that never arrived. Despite the investigators' recommendation that Putin be fired, Putin remained head of the Committee for External Relations until 1996. From 1994 to 1996, he held several other political and governmental positions in Saint Petersburg. In March 1994, Putin was appointed as first deputy chairman of the government of Saint Petersburg. In May 1995, he organized the St. Petersburg branch of the pro-government Our Home, Russia political party, the Liberal Party of Power founded by Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin. In 1995, he managed the legislative election campaign for that party, and from 1995 through June 1997, he was the leader of its St. Petersburg branch. 1996 to 1999, early Moscow career. In June 1996, Sobchak lost his bid for re-election in St. Petersburg, and Putin, who had led his election campaign, resigned from his positions in the city administration. He moved to Moscow and was appointed as deputy chief of the Presidential Property Management Department headed by Pavel Borodin. He occupied this position until March 1997. He was responsible for the foreign property of the state and organized the transfer of the former assets of the Soviet Union and Communist Party to the Russian Federation. On 26 March 1997, President Boris Yeltsin appointed Putin deputy chief of the presidential staff, a post which he retained until May 1998, and chief of the main control directorate of the Presidential Property Management Department, until June 1998. His predecessor in this position was Alexei Kudrin and his successor was Nikolai Patrushev, both future prominent politicians and Putin's associates. On 27 June 1997, at the St. Petersburg Mining Institute, guided by Rector Vladimir Litvinenko, Putin defended his candidate of science dissertation in economics, titled, The Strategic Planning of Regional Resources Under the Formation of Market Relations. This exemplified the custom in Russia whereby a young rising official wrote a scholarly work in mid-career. When Putin later became president, the dissertation became a target of plagiarism accusations by fellows at the Brookings Institution. Putin responded that the dissertation was referenced. The Brookings fellows asserted that it constituted plagiarism, albeit perhaps unintentional. The dissertation committee refuted the accusations. On 25 May 1998, Putin was appointed first deputy chief of the presidential staff for the regions, in succession to Victoria Matina, and, on 15 July, he was appointed head of the Commission for the Preparation of Agreements on the Delimitation of the Power of the Regions and head of the Federal Center attached to the president, replacing Sergey Shakray. After Putin's appointment, the Commission completed no such agreements, although during Shakray's term as the head of the Commission 46 such agreements had been signed. Later, after becoming president, Putin cancelled all 46 agreements. On 25 July 1998, Yeltsin appointed Putin director of the Federal Security Service, the primary intelligence and security organization of the Russian Federation and the successor to the KGB. 1999. First premiership. On 9 August 1999, Putin was appointed one of three first deputy prime ministers, and later on that day, was appointed acting prime minister of the government of the Russian Federation by President Yeltsin. Yeltsin also announced that he wanted to see Putin as his successor. Later on that same day, Putin agreed to run for the presidency. On 16 August, the State Duma approved his appointment as prime minister with 233 votes in favor, versus 84 against, 17 abstained, while a simple majority of 226 was required, making him Russia's fifth PM in fewer than 18 months. On his appointment, few expected Putin, virtually unknown to the general public, to last any longer than his predecessors. He was initially regarded as a Yeltsin loyalist. Like other prime ministers of Boris Yeltsin, Putin did not choose ministers himself. His cabinet was determined by the presidential administration. Yeltsin's main opponents and would-be successors were already campaigning to replace the ailing president, and they fought hard to prevent Putin's emergence as a potential successor. Following the Russian apartment bombings and the invasion of Dagestan by Mujahideens, including the former KGB agents, based in the Chechen Republic of Ichkeria, Putin's law and order image and unrelenting approach to the Second Chechen War soon combined to raise his popularity and allowed him to overtake his rivals. While not formally associated with any party, Putin pledged his support to the newly formed Unity Party, which won the second largest percentage of the popular vote, 23.3%, in the December 1999 Duma elections, and in turn supported Putin. 1999-2000, acting presidency. On the 31st of December 1999, Yeltsin unexpectedly resigned and, according to the Constitution of Russia, Putin became acting president of the Russian Federation. On assuming this role, Putin went on a previously scheduled visit to Russian troops in Chechnya. The first presidential decree that Putin signed, on the 31st of December 1999, was titled, On Guarantees for the Former President of the Russian Federation and the Members of His Family. This ensured that corruption charges against the outgoing president and his relatives would not be pursued. This was most notably targeted at the Mabtex bribery case in which Yeltsin's family members were involved. On the 30th of August 2000, a criminal investigation, number 18,238,278-95, in which Putin himself, as a member of the Saint Petersburg city government, was one of the suspects, was dropped. On the 30th of December 2000, yet another case against the prosecutor general was dropped, for lack of evidence, despite thousands of documents having been passed by Swiss prosecutors. On the 12th of February 2001, Putin signed a similar federal law which replaced the decree of 1999. A case regarding Putin's alleged corruption in metal exports from 1992 was brought back by Marina Sale, but she was silenced and forced to leave St. Petersburg. While his opponents had been preparing for an election in June 2000, Yeltsin's resignation resulted in the presidential elections being held within 3 months. On the 26th of March 2000, Putin won in the first round with 53% of the vote. 2000 to 2004, first presidential term. The inauguration of President Putin occurred on the 7th of May 2000. Putin appointed the Minister of Finance, Mikhail Kasyanov, as the Prime Minister. The first major challenge to Putin's popularity came in August 2000, when he was criticized for the alleged mishandling of the Kursk submarine disaster. That criticism was largely because it was several days before Putin returned from vacation, and several more before he visited the scene. Between 2000 and 2004, Putin set about the reconstruction of the impoverished condition of the country, apparently winning a power struggle with the Russian oligarchs, reaching a grand bargain with them. This bargain allowed the oligarchs to maintain most of their powers, in exchange for their explicit support for, and alignment with, Putin's government. The Moscow theater hostage crisis occurred in October 2002. Many in the Russian press and in the international media warned that the deaths of 130 hostages in the Special Forces rescue operation during the crisis would severely damage President Putin's popularity. However, shortly after the siege had ended, the Russian president enjoyed record public approval ratings. 83% of Russians declared themselves satisfied with Putin and his handling of the siege. In 2003, a referendum was held in Chechnya, adopting a new constitution which declares that the Republic of Chechnya is a part of Russia. On the other hand, the region did acquire autonomy. Chechnya has been gradually stabilized with the establishment of the parliamentary elections and a regional government. Throughout the Second Chechen War, Russia severely disabled the Chechen rebel movement. However, sporadic attacks by rebels continued to occur throughout the Northern Caucasus. 2004 to 2008, second presidential term. On the 14th of March 2004, Putin was elected to the presidency for a second term, receiving 71% of the vote. The Beslan school hostage crisis took place on the 1st to the 3rd of September 2004. More than 330 people died, including 186 children. The near 10-year period prior to the rise of Putin after the dissolution of Soviet rule was a time of upheaval in Russia. In a 2005 Kremlin speech, Putin characterized the collapse of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. Putin elaborated, moreover, the epidemic of disintegration infected Russia itself. The country's cradle-to-grave social safety net was gone and life expectancy declined in the period preceding Putin's rule. In 2005, the national priority projects were launched to improve Russia's healthcare, education, housing and agriculture. The continued criminal prosecution of Russia's then richest man, president of Yukos Oil and Gas Company Mikhail Khodorkovsky, for fraud and tax evasion was seen by the international press as a retaliation for Khodorkovsky's donations to both liberal and communist opponents of the Kremlin. Khodorkovsky was arrested. Yukos was bankrupted and the company's assets were auctioned at below market value, with the largest share acquired by the state company Rosneft. The fate of Yukos was seen as a sign of a broader shift of Russia towards a system of state capitalism. This was underscored in July 2014 when shareholders of Yukos were awarded $50 billion in compensation by the Permanent Arbitration Court in The Hague. On 7 October 2006, Anna Politkovskaya, a journalist who exposed corruption in the Russian army and its conduct in Chechnya, was shot in the lobby of her apartment building on Putin's birthday. The death of Politkovskaya triggered international criticism, with accusations that Putin had failed to protect the country's new independent media. Putin himself said that her death caused the government more problems than her writings. In 2007, dissenters' marches were organized by the opposition group The Other Russia, led by former chess champion Garry Kasparov and national Bolshevist leader Eduard Limonov. Following prior warnings, demonstrations in several Russian cities were met by police action, which included interfering with the travel of the protesters and the arrests of as many as 150 people who attempted to break through police lines. On 12 September 2007, Putin dissolved the government upon the request of Prime Minister Mikhail Fradkov. Fradkov commented that it was to give the president a free hand in the run-up to the parliamentary election. Viktor Zubkov was appointed the new prime minister. In December 2007, United Russia 64 won and 24% of the popular vote in their run for State Duma according to election preliminary results. United Russia's victory in the December 2007 elections was seen by many as an indication of strong popular support of the then Russian leadership and its policies. 2008 to 2012, second premiership. Putin was barred from a third consecutive term by the constitution. First Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev was elected his successor. In a power-switching operation on 8 May 2008, only a day after handing the presidency to Medvedev, Putin was appointed Prime Minister of Russia, maintaining his political dominance. Putin has said that overcoming the consequences of the world economic crisis was one of the two main achievements of his second premiership. The other was stabilizing the size of Russia's population between 2008 and 2011 following a long period of demographic collapse that began in the 1990s. At the United Russia Congress in Moscow on 24 September 2011, Medvedev officially proposed that Putin stand for the presidency in 2012, an offer Putin accepted. Given United Russia's near-total dominance of Russian politics, many observers believed that Putin was assured of a third term. The move was expected to see Medvedev stand on the United Russia ticket in the parliamentary elections in December, with a goal of becoming prime minister at the end of his presidential term. After the parliamentary elections on 4 December 2011, tens of thousands of Russians engaged in protests against alleged electoral fraud, the largest protests in Putin's time. Protesters criticized Putin and United Russia and demanded annulment of the election results. Those protests sparked the fear of a color revolution in society. Putin allegedly organized a number of paramilitary groups loyal to himself and to the United Russia Party in the period between 2005 and 2012. 2012 to 2018, third presidential term. On 24 September 2011, while speaking at the United Russia Party Congress, Medvedev announced that he would recommend the party nominate Putin as its presidential candidate. He also revealed that the two men had long ago cut a deal to allow Putin to run for president in 2012. This switch was termed by many in the media as Rokirovka, the Russian term for the chess move, castling. On 4 March 2012, Putin won the 2012 Russian presidential elections in the first round, with 63.6% of the vote, despite widespread accusations of vote rigging. Opposition groups accused Putin and the United Russia Party of fraud. While efforts to make the elections transparent were publicized, including the usage of webcams in polling stations, the vote was criticized by the Russian opposition and by international observers from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe for procedural irregularities. Anti-Putin protests took place during and directly after the presidential campaign. The most notorious protest was the Pussy Riot performance on 21 February and subsequent trial. An estimated 8,000 to 20,000 protesters gathered in Moscow on 6 May, when 80 people were injured in confrontations with police, and 450 were arrested, with another 120 arrests taking place the following day. A counter-protest of Putin supporters occurred which culminated in a gathering of an estimated 130,000 supporters at the Luzhniki Stadium, Russia's largest stadium. Some of the attendees stated that they had been paid to come, were forced to come by their employers, or were misled into believing that they were going to attend a folk festival instead. The rally is considered to be the largest in support of Putin to date. Putin's presidency was inaugurated in the Kremlin on 7 May 2012. On his first day as president, Putin issued 14 presidential decrees, which are sometimes called the May Decrees by the media, including a lengthy one stating wide-ranging goals for the Russian economy. Other decrees concerned education, housing, skilled labor training, relations with the European Union, the defense industry, inter-ethnic relations, and other policy areas dealt with in Putin's program articles issued during the presidential campaign. In 2012 and 2013, Putin and the United Russia Party backed stricter legislation against the LGBT community in Saint Petersburg, Arkhangelsk and Novosibirsk. A law called the Russian Gay Propaganda Law, that is against homosexual propaganda, which prohibits such symbols as the rainbow flag as well as published works containing homosexual content, was adopted by the State Duma in June 2013. Responding to international concerns about Russia's legislation, Putin asked critics to note that the law was a ban on the propaganda of pedophilia and homosexuality, and he stated that homosexual visitors to the 2014 Winter Olympics should leave the children in peace, but denied there was any professional, career or social discrimination against homosexuals in Russia. In June 2013, Putin attended a televised rally of the All Russia People's Front where he was elected head of the movement, which was set up in 2011. According to journalist Steve Rosenberg, the movement is intended to reconnect the Kremlin to the Russian people, and one day, if necessary, replace the increasingly unpopular United Russia Party that currently backs Putin. Russo-Ukrainian conflict. In 2014, Russia made several military incursions into Ukrainian territory. After the Euromaidan protests and the fall of Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, Russian soldiers without insignias took control of strategic positions and infrastructure within the Ukrainian territory of Crimea. Russia then annexed the Republic of Crimea and city of Sevastopol after a referendum in which Crimeans voted to join the Russian Federation, according to official results. Subsequently, demonstrations against Ukrainian Rada legislative actions by pro-Russian groups in the Donbass area of Ukraine escalated into an armed conflict between the Ukrainian government and the Russia-backed separatist forces of the self-declared Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. In August, Russian military vehicles crossed the border in several locations of Donetsk Oblast. The incursion by the Russian military was seen by Ukrainian authorities as responsible for the defeat of Ukrainian forces in early September. In November 2014, the Ukrainian military reported intensive movement of troops and equipment from Russia into the separatist-controlled parts of eastern Ukraine. The Associated Press reported 80 unmarked military vehicles on the move in rebel-controlled areas. An OSCE special monitoring mission observed convoys of heavy weapons and tanks in DPR-controlled territory without insignia. OSCE monitors further stated that they observed vehicles transporting ammunition and soldiers' dead bodies crossing the Russian-Ukrainian border under the guise of humanitarian aid convoys. As of early August 2015, the OSCE observed over 21 such vehicles marked with the Russian military code for soldiers killed in action. According to the Moscow Times, Russia has tried to intimidate and silence human rights workers discussing Russian soldiers' deaths in the conflict. The OSCE repeatedly reported that its observers were denied access to the areas controlled by combined Russian separatist forces. The majority of members of the international community and organizations such as Amnesty International have condemned Russia for its actions in post-revolutionary Ukraine, accusing it of breaking international law and of violating Ukrainian sovereignty. Many countries implemented economic sanctions against Russia, Russian individuals or companies to which Russia responded in kind. In October 2015, The Washington Post reported that Russia had redeployed some of its elite units from Ukraine to Syria in recent weeks to support Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. In December 2015, Russian Federation President Putin admitted that Russian military intelligence officers were operating in Ukraine. According to academic Andrei Sagankov, many members of the international community assumed that Putin's annexation of Crimea had initiated a completely new kind of Russian foreign policy. They took the annexation of Crimea to mean that his foreign policy had shifted from state-driven foreign policy to taking an offensive stance to recreate the Soviet Union. He also says that this policy shift can be understood as Putin trying to defend nations in Russia's sphere of influence from encroaching Western power. While the act to annex the Crimea was bold and drastic, his new foreign policy may have more similarities to his older policies. Intervention in Syria. On 30 September 2015, President Putin authorized Russian military intervention in the Syrian civil war, following a formal request by the Syrian government for military help against rebel and jihadist groups. The Russian military activities consisted of air strikes, cruise missile strikes and the use of front-line advisors and Russian special forces against militant groups opposed to the Syrian government, including the Syrian opposition, as well as Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, Al-Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda in the Levant, Tahrir al-Sham, Ahrar al-Sham and the Army of Conquest. After Putin's announcement on 14 March 2016 that the mission he had set for the Russian military in Syria had been largely accomplished, and ordered the withdrawal of the main part of the Russian forces from Syria, Russian forces deployed in Syria continued to actively operate in support of the Syrian government. Russia's interference in the 2016 U.S. election. In January 2017, a U.S. intelligence community assessment expressed high confidence that Putin personally ordered an influence campaign, initially to denigrate Hillary Clinton and to harm her electoral chances and potential presidency, then later developing a clear preference for Donald Trump. Both Trump and Putin have consistently denied any Russian interference in the U.S. election. The New York Times reported in July 2018 that the CIA had long nurtured a Russian source who eventually rose to a position close to Putin, allowing the source to pass key information in 2016 about Putin's direct involvement. Putin continued similar attempts in the 2020 U.S. election. 2018 present, fourth presidential term. Putin won the 2018 presidential election with more than 76% of the vote. His fourth term began on 7 May 2018, which will last until 2024. On the same day, Putin invited Dmitry Medvedev to form a new government. On 15 May 2018, Putin took part in the opening of the movement along the highway section of the Crimean Bridge. On 18 May 2018, Putin signed decrees on the composition of the new government. On 25 May 2018, Putin announced that he would not run for president in 2024, justifying this in compliance with the Russian constitution. On 14 June 2018, Putin opened the 21st FIFA World Cup, which took place in Russia for the first time. In September 2019, Putin's administration interfered with the results of Russia's nationwide regional elections and manipulated it by eliminating all candidates in the opposition. The event that was aimed at contributing to the ruling party, United Russia's victory, also contributed to inciting mass protests for democracy, leading to large-scale arrests and cases of police brutality. On 15 January 2020, Dmitry Medvedev and his entire government resigned after Vladimir Putin's address to the Federal Assembly. Putin suggested major constitutional amendments that could extend his political power after presidency. At the same time, on behalf of Putin, he continued to exercise his powers until the formation of a new government. The president suggested that Medvedev take the newly created post of deputy chairman of the Security Council. On the same day, Putin nominated Mikhail Mishustin, head of the country's Federal Tax Service, for the post of prime minister. The next day, he was confirmed by the State Duma to the post and appointed prime minister by Putin's decree. This was the first time ever that a PM was confirmed without any votes against. On 21 January 2020, Mishustin presented to Vladimir Putin a draft structure of his cabinet. On the same day, the president signed a decree on the structure of the cabinet and appointed the proposed ministers. COVID-19 pandemic. On 15 March 2020, Putin instructed to form a working group of the State Council to counteract the spread of coronavirus. Putin appointed Moscow Mayor Sergey Sobyanin as the head of the group. On the 22nd of March 2020, after a phone call with Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte, Putin arranged the Russian army to send military medics, special disinfection vehicles and other medical equipment to Italy, which was the European country hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. On the 24th of March 2020, Putin visited a hospital in Moscow's Kommunarka, where patients with coronavirus are kept, where he spoke with them and with doctors. Vladimir Putin began working remotely from his office at Novo Ogaryovo. According to Dmitry Peskov, Putin passes daily tests for coronavirus, and his health is not in danger. On the 25th of March, President Putin announced in a televised address to the nation that the 22nd of April constitutional referendum would be postponed due to the coronavirus. He added that the next week would be a nationwide paid holiday and urged Russians to stay at home. Putin also announced a list of measures of social protection, support for small and medium-sized enterprises, and changes in fiscal policy. Putin announced the following measures for micro-enterprises, small and medium-sized businesses: deferring tax payments, except Russia's value-added tax, for the next 6 months, cutting the size of Social Security contributions in half, deferring Social Security contributions, deferring loan repayments for the next 6 months, a 6-month moratorium on fines, debt collection, and creditors' applications for bankruptcy of debtor enterprises. On the 2nd of April, Putin again issued an address in which he announced prolongation of the non-working time until the 30th of April. Putin likened Russia's fight against COVID-19 to Russia's battles with invading Pecheneg and Cuman steppe nomads in the 10th and 11th centuries. In a 24 to the 27th of April Levada poll, 48% of Russian respondents said that they disapproved of Putin's handling of the coronavirus pandemic, and his strict isolation and lack of leadership during the crisis was widely commented as a sign of losing his strongman image. Constitutional referendum and amendments. Putin signed an executive order on 3 July 2020 to officially insert amendments into the Russian constitution, allowing him to run for 2 additional 6-year terms. These amendments took effect on 4 July 2020. Since the 11th of July, protests have been held in the Khabarovsk Krai in Russia's Far East in support of arrested regional governor Sergey. The 2020 Khabarovsk Krai protests have become increasingly anti-Putin. A July 2020 Levada poll found that 45% of surveyed Russians supported the protests. On the 22nd of December 2020, Putin signed a bill giving lifetime prosecutorial immunity to Russian ex-presidents. Domestic policies. Putin's domestic policies, particularly early in his first presidency, were aimed at creating a vertical power structure. On 13 May 2000, he issued a decree putting the 89 federal subjects of Russia into 7 administrative federal districts and appointed a presidential envoy responsible for each of those districts, whose official title is plenipotentiary representative. According to Stephen White, under the presidency of Putin, Russia made it clear that it had no intention of establishing a second edition of the American or British political system, but rather a system that was closer to Russia's own traditions and circumstances. Some commentators have described Putin's administration as a sovereign democracy. According to the proponents of that description, primarily Vladislav Surkov, the government's actions and policies ought above all to enjoy popular support within Russia itself and not be directed or influenced from outside the country. The period after 2012 also saw mass protests against the falsification of elections, censorship and toughening of free assembly laws. In July 2000, according to a law proposed by Putin and approved by the Federal Assembly of Russia, Putin gained the right to dismiss the heads of the 89 federal subjects. In 2004, the direct election of those heads, usually called governors, by popular vote was replaced with a system whereby they would be nominated by the president and approved or disapproved by regional legislatures. This was seen by Putin as a necessary move to stop separatist tendencies and get rid of those governors who were connected with organized crime. This and other government actions effected under Putin's presidency have been criticized by many independent Russian media outlets and Western commentators as anti-democratic. In 2012, as proposed by Putin's successor, Dmitry Medvedev, the direct election of governors was reintroduced. During his first term in office, Putin opposed some of the Yeltsin-era oligarchs, as well as his political opponents, resulting in the exile or imprisonment of such people as Boris Berezovsky, Vladimir Gasinski, and Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Other oligarchs such as Roman Abramovich and Arkady Rotenberg are friends and allies with Putin. Putin succeeded in codifying land law and tax law and promulgated new codes on labor, administrative, criminal, commercial and civil procedural law. Under Medvedev's presidency, Putin's government implemented some key reforms in the area of state security, the Russian police reform and the Russian military reform. Economic, industrial, and energy policies. Sergey Guriev, when talking about Putin's economic policy, divided it into 4 distinct periods: the reform years of his first term, 1999 to 2003, the statist years of his second term, 2004, the first half of 2008, the world economic crisis and recovery, the second half of 2008 to 2013, and the Russo-Ukrainian War, Russia's growing isolation from the global economy, and stagnation, 2014-present. In 2000, Putin launched the Program for the Socio-Economic Development of the Russian Federation for the period 2000 to 2010, but it was abandoned in 2008 when it was 30% complete. Fueled by the 2000s commodities boom including record high oil prices, under the Putin administration from 2000 to 2016, an increase in income in USD terms was 4.5 times. During Putin's first 8 years in office, industry grew substantially, as did production, construction, real incomes, credit, and the middle class. A fund for oil revenue allowed Russia to repay all of the Soviet Union's debts by 2005. Russia joined the World Trade Organization on the 22nd of August 2012. In 2006, Putin launched an industry consolidation program to bring the main aircraft-producing companies under a single umbrella organization, the United Aircraft Corporation. UAC General Director in September 2020 announced that UAC will receive largest post-Soviet government support package for the aircraft industry to pay and renegotiate the debt. In 2014, Putin signed a deal to supply China with 38 billion cubic meters of natural gas per year. Power of Siberia, which Putin has called the world's biggest construction project, was launched in 2019 and is expected to continue for 30 years at an ultimate cost to China of $400 billion. The ongoing financial crisis began in the second half of 2014 when the Russian ruble collapsed due to a decline in the price of oil and international sanctions against Russia. These events in turn led to loss of investor confidence and capital flight, though it has also been argued that the sanctions had little to no effect on Russia's economy. In 2014, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project named Putin their Person of the Year award for furthering corruption and organized crime. As noted by Russian journalists after the 2018 presidential inauguration, Putin has since 2007 repeatedly predicted that Russia will become one of the world's fifth largest economies, roughly within 10 years from that date. Thus far, this target has not been achieved. Environmental policy. In 2004, President Putin signed the Kyoto Protocol Treaty designed to reduce greenhouse gases. However, Russia did not face mandatory cuts, because the Kyoto Protocol limits emissions to a percentage increase or decrease from 1990 levels, and Russia's greenhouse gas emissions fell well below the 1990 baseline due to a drop in economic output after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Putin personally supervises a number of protection programs for rare and endangered animals in Russia, such as the Amur tiger, the white whale, the polar bear, and the snow leopard. Religious policy. Buddhism, Eastern Orthodox Christianity, Islam, and Judaism enjoyed limited state support in the Putin era. The vast construction and restoration of churches started in the 1990s, continued under Putin, and the state allowed the teaching of religion in schools. Parents are provided with a choice for their children to learn the basics of one of the traditional religions or secular ethics. His approach to religious policy has been characterized as one of support for religious freedoms, but also the attempt to unify different religions under the authority of the state. In 2012, Putin was honored in Bethlehem and a street was named after him. Putin regularly attends the most important services of the Russian Orthodox Church on the main holy days. He established a good relationship with patriarchs of the Russian Church, the late Alexei II of Moscow and the current Kirill of Moscow. As president, he took an active personal part in promoting the Act of Canonical Communion with the Moscow Patriarchate, signed the 17th of May 2007, that restored relations between the Moscow-based Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia after the 80-year schism. Under Putin, the Hasidic FJCR became increasingly influential within the Jewish community, partly due to the influence of federations supporting businessmen mediated through their alliances with Putin, notably Lev Leviev and Roman Abramovich. According to the JTA, Putin is popular amongst the Russian Jewish community, who see him as a force for stability. Russia's chief rabbi, Beryl Lazar, said Putin paid great attention to the needs of our community and related to us with a deep respect. In 2016, Ronald S. Lauder, the president of the World Jewish Congress, also praised Putin for making Russia a country where Jews are welcome. Military development. The resumption of long-distance flights of Russia's strategic bombers was followed by the announcement by Russian Defense Minister Anatoly Sergey during his meeting with Putin on 5 December 2007, that 11 ships, including the aircraft carrier Kuznetsov, would take part in the first major Navy sortie into the Mediterranean since Soviet times. While from the early 2000s Russia started placing more money into its military and defense industry, it was only in 2008 that the full-scale Russian military reform began, aiming to modernize the Russian armed forces and making them significantly more effective. The reform was largely carried out by Defense Minister Anatoly Sergey during Medvedev's presidency, under the supervision of both Putin, as the head of government, and Medvedev, as the commander-in-chief of the Russian armed forces. Key elements of the reform included reducing the armed forces to a strength of 1 million, reducing the number of officers, centralizing officer training from 65 military schools into 10 systemic military training centers, creating a professional NCO corps, reducing the size of the central command, introducing more civilian logistics and auxiliary staff, elimination of cadre strength formations, reorganizing the reserves, reorganizing the army into a brigade system, and reorganizing air forces into an airbase system instead of regiments. The number of Russia's military districts was reduced to 4. The term of draft service was reduced from 2 years to 1. The gradual transition to the majority professional army by the late 2010s was announced, and a large program of supplying the armed forces with new military equipment and ships was started. The Russian Space Forces were replaced on 1 December 2011 with the Russian Aerospace Defense Forces. According to the Kremlin, Putin embarked a build-up of Russia's nuclear capabilities because of U.S. President George W. Bush's decision to withdraw from the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. Most analysts agree that Russia's nuclear strategy under Putin eventually brought it into violation of the 1987 Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Because of this, U.S. President Donald Trump announced the U.S. would no longer consider itself bound by the treaty's provisions, raising nuclear tensions between the two powers. This prompted Putin to state that Russia would not launch first in a nuclear conflict but would annihilate any adversary. Russians killed in such a conflict will go to heaven as martyrs. Most military analysts believe Russia would consider launching first if losing a major conventional conflict as part of an escalate to de-escalate strategy that would bring adversaries to the negotiating table. Putin has also sought to increase Russian territorial claims in the Arctic and its military presence here. In August 2007, Russian Expedition Arctica 2007, part of research related to the 2001 Russian territorial extension claim, planted a flag on the seabed at the North Pole. Both Russian submarines and troops deployed in the Arctic have been increasing. Human rights policy. New York City-based NGO Human Rights Watch, in a report entitled Laws of Attrition, authored by Hugh Williamson, the British director of HRW's Europe and Central Asia Division, has claimed that since May 2012, when Putin was re-elected as president, Russia has enacted many restrictive laws, started inspections of non-governmental organizations, harassed, intimidated and imprisoned political activists, and started to restrict critics. The new laws include the Foreign Agents Law, which is widely regarded as overbroad by including Russian human rights organizations which receive some international grant funding, the Treason Law, and the Assembly Law, which penalizes many expressions of dissent. Human rights activists have criticized Russia for censoring speech of LGBT activists due to the Gay Propaganda Law, and increasing violence against LGBT+ people due to the law. In 2020, Putin signed a law on labeling individuals and organizations receiving funding from abroad as foreign agents. The law is an expansion of foreign agent legislation adopted in 2012. The media. Scott Gelbach, a professor of political science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, has claimed that since 1999, Putin has systematically punished journalists who challenge his official point of view. Maria Lipman, an American writing in foreign affairs, claims the crackdown that followed Putin's return to the Kremlin in 2012 extended to the liberal media, which had until then been allowed to operate fairly independently. The internet has attracted Putin's attention because his critics have tried to use it to challenge his control of information. Marion K. Layden, who worked for the CIA as a Soviet analyst in the 1980s, says, having muzzled Russia's print and broadcast media, Putin focused his energies on the internet. Robert W. Ortung and Christopher Walker report. Reporters Without Borders, for instance, ranked Russia 148 in its 2013 list of 179 countries in terms of freedom of the press. It particularly criticized Russia for the crackdown on the political opposition and the failure of the authorities to vigorously pursue and bring to justice criminals who have murdered journalists. Freedom House ranks Russian media as not free, indicating that basic safeguards and guarantees for journalists and media enterprises are absent. In the early 2000s, Putin began promoting the idea in Russian media that they are the modern-day version of the 17th-century Romanov czars who ended Russia's time of troubles, meaning they claim to be the peacemakers and stabilizers after the fall of the Soviet Union. Promoting conservatism. Putin has promoted explicitly conservative policies in social, cultural, and political matters, both at home and abroad. Putin has attacked globalism and neoliberalism and is identified by scholars with Russian conservatism. Putin has promoted new think tanks that bring together like-minded intellectuals and writers. For example, The Izborsky Club, founded in 2012 by the conservative right-wing journalist Alexander Prokhanov, stresses Russian nationalism, the restoration of Russia's historical greatness, and systematic opposition to liberal ideas and policies. Vladislav Surkov, a senior government official, has been one of the key economics consultants during Putin's presidency. In cultural and social affairs, Putin has collaborated closely with the Russian Orthodox Church. Patriarch Kirill of Moscow, head of the church, endorsed his election in 2012, stating Putin's terms were like a miracle of God. Stephen Myers reports, the church, once heavily repressed, had emerged from the Soviet collapse as one of the most respected institutions. Now Kirill led the faithful directly into an alliance with the state. Mark Woods, a Baptist minister and contributing editor to Christian Today, provides specific examples of how the church has backed the expansion of Russian power into Crimea and eastern Ukraine. More broadly, the New York Times reports in September 2016 how the church's policy prescriptions support the Kremlin's appeal to social conservatives. A fervent foe of homosexuality and any attempt to put individual rights above those of family, community or nation, the Russian Orthodox Church helps project Russia as the natural ally of all those who pine for a more secure, a liberal world free from the tradition-crushing rush of globalization, multiculturalism and women's and gay rights. International sporting events. In 2007, Putin led a successful effort on behalf of Sochi for the 2014 Winter Olympics and the 2014 Winter Paralympics, the first Winter Olympic Games to ever be hosted by Russia. Likewise, in 2008, the city of Kazan won the bid for the 2013 Summer Universiade, and on the 2nd of December 2010 Russia won the right to host the 2017 FIFA Confederations Cup and 2018 FIFA World Cup, also for the first time in Russian history. In 2013, Putin stated that gay athletes would not face any discrimination at the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics. Wildlife protection and conservation. Putin is chairman of the Russian Geographical Society's Board of Trustees and is actively engaged in the protection of rare species. The programs are being conducted by the Severtsov Institute of Ecology and Evolution at the Russian Academy of Sciences. Foreign policy. Leonid Bershidsky analyzed Putin's interview with the Financial Times and concluded, Putin is an imperialist of the old Soviet school, rather than a nationalist or a racist, and he has cooperated with, and promoted, people who are known to be gay. Putin spoke favorably of artificial intelligence in regards to foreign policy. Artificial intelligence is the future, not only for Russia, but for all humankind. It comes with colossal opportunities, but also threats that are difficult to predict. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world. Mikhail Khodorkovsky stated, Putin would like to sit at a table with the US president, and maybe the president of China, and just these three will decide the fate of the world. Asia. In 2012, Putin wrote an article in Indian newspaper The Hindu, saying that the declaration on strategic partnership between India and Russia signed in October 2000 became a truly historic step. Today, India remains the largest customer of Russian military equipment, and the two countries share a historically strong strategic and diplomatic relationship. Russia, under Putin, has maintained positive relations with the Asian states of SCO and BRICS. In the 21st century, Sino-Russian relations have significantly strengthened bilaterally and economically. The Treaty of Friendship, and the construction of the Espo oil pipeline and the Power of Siberia gas pipeline formed a special relationship between the two great powers. Post-Soviet states. Under Putin, the Kremlin has consistently stated that Russia has a sphere of influence and privileged interests over other post-Soviet states, which are referred to as the near abroad in Russia. It has also been stated that the post-Soviet states are strategically vital to Russian interests. Some Russia experts have compared this concept to the Monroe Doctrine. A series of so-called color revolutions in the post-Soviet states, namely the Rose Revolution in Georgia in 2003, the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004 and the Tulip Revolution in Kyrgyzstan in 2005, led to frictions in the relations of those countries with Russia. In December 2004, Putin criticized the Rose and Orange revolutions, saying, if you have permanent revolutions you risk plunging the post-Soviet space into endless conflict. Putin allegedly declared at a NATO-Russia summit in 2008 that if Ukraine joined NATO, Russia could contend to annex the Ukrainian East and Crimea. At the summit, he told U.S. President George W. Bush that Ukraine is not even a state, while the following year Putin referred to Ukraine as Little Russia. Following the 2014 Ukrainian Revolution in March 2014, the Russian Federation annexed Crimea. According to Putin, this was done because Crimea has always been and remains an inseparable part of Russia. After the Russian annexation of Crimea, he said that Ukraine includes regions of Russia's historic south, and was created on a whim by the Bolsheviks. He went on to declare that the February 2014 ousting of Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych had been orchestrated by the West as an attempt to weaken Russia. Our Western partners have crossed a line. They behaved rudely, irresponsibly and unprofessionally, he said, adding that the people who had come to power in Ukraine were nationalists, neo-Nazis, Russophobes and anti-Semites. In a July 2014 speech midst an armed insurgency in eastern Ukraine, Putin stated he would use Russia's entire arsenal, and the right of self-defense, to protect Russian speakers outside Russia. With the split of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church from the Russian one in 2018, a number of experts came to the conclusion that Putin's policy of forceful engagement in post-Soviet republics significantly backfired on him, leading to a situation where he annexed Crimea, but lost Ukraine, and provoked a much more cautious approach to Russia among other post-Soviet countries. In late August 2014, Putin stated, "People who have their own views on history and the history of our country may argue with me, but it seems to me that the Russian and Ukrainian peoples are practically one people." After making a similar statement, in late December 2015 he stated, "The Ukrainian culture, as well as Ukrainian literature, surely has a source of its own." In August 2008, Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili attempted to restore control over the breakaway South Ossetia. However, the Georgian military was soon defeated in the resulting 2008 South Ossetia War after regular Russian forces entered South Ossetia and then Georgia proper, then also opened a second front in the other Georgian breakaway province of Abkhazia with Abkhazian forces. Despite existing or past tensions between Russia and most of the post-Soviet states, Putin has followed the policy of Eurasian integration. Putin endorsed the idea of a Eurasian Union in 2011. The concept was proposed by the President of Kazakhstan in 1994. On the 18th of November 2011, the presidents of Belarus, Kazakhstan and Russia signed an agreement setting a target of establishing the Eurasian Union by 2015. The Eurasian Union was established on the 1st of January 2015. The United States, Western Europe, and NATO. Under Putin, Russia's relationships with NATO and the US have passed through several stages. When he first became president, relations were cautious, but after the 9/11 attacks Putin quickly supported the US in the war on terror and the opportunity for partnership appeared. According to Stephen F. Cohen, the US repaid by further expansion of NATO to Russia's borders and by unilateral withdrawal from the 1972 Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty. But others pointed out the applications from new countries willing to join NATO was driven primarily by Russians' behavior in Chechnya, Transnistria, Abkhazia, Yanayev Puch, as well as calls to restore USSR in its previous borders by prominent Russian politicians. From 2003, when Russia strongly opposed the US when it waged the Iraq War, Putin became ever more distant from the West. Relations steadily deteriorated. According to Russia scholar Stephen F. Cohen, the narrative of the mainstream US media, following that of the White House, became anti-Putin. In an interview with Michael Sturmer, Putin said there were three questions which most concerned Russia and Eastern Europe, namely, the status of Kosovo, the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe and American plans to build missile defense sites in Poland and the Czech Republic, and suggested that all three were linked. His view was that concessions by the West on one of the questions might be met with concessions from Russia on another. In a January 2007 interview, Putin said Russia was in favor of a democratic multipolar world and strengthening the systems of international law. In February 2007, Putin criticized what he called the United States' monopolistic dominance in global relations, and almost uncontained hyperuse of force in international relations. He said the result of it is that no one feels safe. Because no one can feel that international law is like a stone wall that will protect them. Of course, such a policy stimulates an arms race. This came to be known as the Munich Speech, and NATO Secretary Jaap de Hoop Scheffer called the speech disappointing and not helpful. The months following Putin's Munich speech were marked by tension and a surge in rhetoric on both sides of the Atlantic. Both Russian and American officials, however, denied the idea of a new Cold War. Putin publicly opposed plans for the U.S. missile shield in Europe and presented President George W. Bush with a counterproposal on 7 June 2007 which was declined. Russia suspended its participation in the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty on the 11th of December 2007. Putin opposed Kosovo's 2008 declaration of independence, warning that it would destabilize the whole system of international relations. After 9/11 attacks on the U.S. in 2001, Putin had good relations with American President George W. Bush, and many Western European leaders. His cooler, and more businesslike, relationship with German Chancellor Angela Merkel is often attributed to Merkel's upbringing in the former DDR, where Putin was stationed as a KGB agent. He had a very friendly and warm relationship with the former Prime Minister of Italy Silvio Berlusconi. The two leaders often described their relationship as a close friendship, continuing to organize bilateral meetings even after Berlusconi's resignation in November 2011. In late 2013, Russian-American relations deteriorated further when the United States canceled a summit, for the first time since 1960, after Putin gave asylum to American Edward Snowden, who had leaked massive amounts of classified information from the NSA. In 2014, Russia was suspended from the G8 group as a result of its annexation of Crimea. However, in June 2015, Putin told that Russia has no intention of attacking NATO. On the 9th of November 2016, Putin congratulated Donald Trump on becoming the 45th President of the United States. In December 2016, U.S. intelligence officials, headed by James Clapper, quoted by CBS News, stated that Putin approved the email hacking and cyber attacks during the U.S. election against the Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton. A spokesman for Putin denied the reports. Putin has repeatedly accused Hillary Clinton, who served as U.S. Secretary of State from 2009 to 2013, of interfering in Russia's internal affairs, and in December 2016, Clinton accused Putin of having a personal grudge against her. With the election of Trump, Putin's favorability in the U.S. increased. A Gallup poll in February 2017 revealed a positive view of Putin among 22% of Americans, the highest since 2003. However, Putin has stated that U.S.-Russian relations, already at the lowest level since the end of the Cold War, have continued to deteriorate after Trump took office in January 2017. On the 18th of June 2020, the National Interest published a 9,000-word essay by Putin, titled, "The Real Lessons of the 75th Anniversary of World War II." In the essay, Putin criticizes the Western historical view of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact as the start of World War II, stating that the Munich Agreement was the beginning. United Kingdom. In 2003, relations between Russia and the United Kingdom deteriorated when the United Kingdom granted political asylum to Putin's former patron, oligarch Boris Berezovsky. This deterioration was intensified by allegations that the British were spying and making secret payments to pro-democracy and human rights groups. Poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko. The end of 2006 brought more strained relations in the wake of the death by polonium poisoning of former KGB and FSB officer Alexander Litvinenko in London, who became an MI6 agent in 2003. In 2007, the crisis in relations continued with expulsion of 4 Russian envoys over Russia's refusal to extradite former KGB bodyguard Andrei Lugovoy to face charges in the murder of Litvinenko. Mirroring the British actions, Russia expelled UK diplomats and took other retaliatory steps. In 2015-16, the British government conducted an inquiry into the death of Alexander Litvinenko. Its report states, the FSB operation to kill Mr. Litvinenko was probably approved by Mr. Patrushev and also by President Putin. The report outlined some possible motives for the murder, including Litvinenko's public statements and books about the alleged involvement of the FSB in mass murder, and what was undoubtedly a personal dimension to the antagonism between Putin and Litvinenko, led to the murder. Poisoning of Sergey Skripal. On 4 March 2018, former double agent Sergey Skripal was poisoned with a Novichok nerve agent in Salisbury. 10 days later, the British government formally accused the Russian state of attempted murder, a charge which Russia denied. After the UK expelled 23 Russian diplomats, an action which would later be responded to with a Russian expulsion of 23 British diplomats, British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson said on 16 March that it was overwhelmingly likely Putin had personally ordered the poisoning of Skripal. Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov called the allegation shocking and unpardonable diplomatic misconduct. Australia and Latin America. Putin and his successor, Medvedev, enjoyed warm relations with Hugo Chavez of Venezuela. Much of this has been through the sale of military equipment. Since 2005, Venezuela has purchased more than $4 billion worth of arms from Russia. In September 2008, Russia sent Tupolev Tu-160 bombers to Venezuela to carry out training flights. In November 2008, both countries held a joint naval exercise in the Caribbean. Earlier in 2000, Putin had re-established stronger ties with Fidel Castro's Cuba. In September 2007, Putin visited Indonesia and in doing so became the first Russian leader to visit the country in more than 50 years. In the same month, Putin also attended the APEC meeting held in Sydney where he met with John Howard, who was the Australian Prime Minister at the time, and signed a uranium trade deal for Australia to sell uranium to Russia. This was the first visit by a Russian president to Australia, Middle East and North Africa. On the 16th of October 2007, Putin visited Iran to participate in the Second Caspian Summit in Tehran, where he met with Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. This was the first visit of a Soviet or Russian leader to Iran since Joseph Stalin's participation in the Tehran Conference in 1943, and thus marked a significant event in Iran-Russia relations. At a press conference after the summit, Putin said that all our states have the right to develop their peaceful nuclear programs without any restrictions. Putin was quoted as describing Iran as a partner, though he expressed concerns over the Iranian nuclear program. In April 2008, Putin became the first Russian president who visited Libya. Putin condemned the foreign military intervention of Libya. He called UN resolution as defective and flawed, and added, "It allows everything. It resembles medieval calls for crusades." Upon the death of Muammar Gaddafi, Putin called it as planned murder by the US, saying, "They showed to the whole world how he was killed, and there was blood all over. Is that what they call a democracy?" Regarding Syria, from 2000 to 2010 Russia sold around $1.5 billion worth of arms to that country, making Damascus Moscow's seventh largest client. During the Syrian civil war, Russia threatened to veto any sanctions against the Syrian government, and continued to supply arms to the regime. Putin opposed any foreign intervention. In June 2012, in Paris, he rejected the statement of French President François Hollande who called on Bashar al-Assad to step down. Putin echoed Assad's argument that anti-regime militants were responsible for much of the bloodshed. He also talked about previous NATO interventions and their results, and asked, "What is happening in Libya, in Iraq? Did they become safer? Where are they heading?" Nobody has an answer. On the 11th of September 2013, The New York Times published an op-ed by Putin urging caution against U.S. intervention in Syria and criticizing American exceptionalism. Putin subsequently helped to arrange for the destruction of Syria's chemical weapons. In 2015, he took a stronger pro-Assad stance and mobilized military support for the regime. Some analysts have summarized Putin as being allied with Shiites and Alawites in the Middle East. In October 2019, Russian President Vladimir Putin visited the United Arab Emirates, where 6 agreements were struck with Abu Dhabi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed. One of them included shared investments between Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund and the Emirati investment fund Mubadala. The two nations signed deals worth over $1.3 billion, in energy, health and advanced technology sectors. Public image, polls and rankings. According to a June 2007 public opinion survey, Putin's approval rating was 81%, the second highest of any leader in the world that year. In January 2013, at the time of 2011 to 2013 Russian protests, Putin's approval rating fell to 62%, the lowest figure since 2000 and a 10-point drop over 2 years. By May 2014, Putin's approval rating hit its highest since 2008, and was 83%. After EU and US sanctions against Russian officials as a result of the crisis in Ukraine, Putin's approval rating reached 87%, according to a survey published on 6 August 2014. In February 2015, based on new domestic polling, Putin was ranked the world's most popular politician. In June 2015, Putin's approval rating climbed to 89%, an all-time high. In 2016, the approval rating was 81%. Observers saw Putin's high approval ratings in 2010s as a consequence of significant improvements in living standards, and Russia's reassertion of itself on the world scene during his presidency. Despite high approval for Putin, confidence in the Russian economy was low, dropping to levels in 2016 that rivaled the recent lows in 2009 at the height of the global economic crisis. Just 14% of Russians in 2016 said their national economy was getting better, and 18% said this about their local economies. Putin's performance at reining in corruption is also unpopular among Russians. Newsweek reported in June 2017 that an opinion poll by the Moscow-based Levada Center indicated that 67% held Putin personally responsible for high-level corruption. In July 2018, Putin's approval rating fell to 63% and just 49% would vote for Putin if presidential elections were held. Levada poll results published in September 2018 showed Putin's personal trustworthiness levels at 39%, decline from 59% in November 2017, with the main contributing factor being the presidential support of the unpopular pension reform and economic stagnation. In October 2018, two-thirds of Russians surveyed in Levada poll agreed that Putin bears full responsibility for the problems of the country, which has been attributed to decline of a popular belief in good Tsar and bad boyars, a traditional attitude towards justifying failures of top of ruling hierarchy in Russia. In January 2019, the percentage of Russians trusting the president hit a then historic minimum 33.4%. It declined further to 31.7% in May 2019, which led to a dispute between the VCIOM and President's Administration Office, who accused it of incorrectly using an open question, after which VCIOM repeated the poll with a closed question getting 72.3%. Nonetheless, in April 2019 Gallup poll showed a record number of Russians, 20%, willing to permanently emigrate from Russia. The decline is even larger in the 17 to 25 age group, who find themselves largely disconnected from the country's aging leadership, nostalgic Soviet rhetoric and nepotistic agenda, according to a report prepared by Vladimir Milov. The percentage of people willing to emigrate permanently in this age group is 41% and 60% has favorable views on the United States, 3 times more than in the 55-plus age group. Decline in support for president and the government is also visible in other polls, such as rapidly growing readiness to protest against poor living conditions. In May 2020, amid the COVID-19 crisis, Putin's approval rating was 67.9%, measured by VCIOM when respondents were presented a list of names, closed question, and 27% when respondents were expected to name politicians they trust, open question. In a closed question survey conducted by Levada, the approval rating was 59%, which has been attributed to continued post-Crimea economic stagnation but also an apathetic response to the pandemic crisis in Russia. In another May 2021 Levada poll, 33% indicated Putin in response to, "Who would you vote for this weekend?" among Moscow respondents and 40% outside of Moscow. Assessments. Critics state that Putin has moved Russia in an autocratic direction, weakening the system of representative government advocated by Boris Yeltsin. Putin has been described as a dictator by political opponent Garry Kasparov, as a bully and arrogant by former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and as self-centered and an isolationist by the Dalai Lama. Former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger wrote in 2014 that the West has demonized Putin. Egon Krenz, former leader of East Germany, said the Cold War never ended and that, after weak presidents like Gorbachev and Yeltsin, it is a great fortune for Russia that it has President Vladimir Putin. Many Russians credit Putin for reviving Russia's fortunes. Former Soviet Union leader Mikhail Gorbachev, while acknowledging the flawed democratic procedures and restrictions on media freedom during the Putin presidency, said that Putin had pulled Russia out of chaos at the end of the Yeltsin years, and that Russians must remember that Putin saved Russia from the beginning of a collapse. In 2015, opposition politician Boris Nemtsov said that Putin was turning Russia into a raw materials colony of China. Chechen Republic head and Putin supporter, Ramzan Kadyrov, states that Putin saved both the Chechen people and Russia. Russia has suffered democratic backsliding during Putin's tenure. Freedom House has listed Russia as being not free since 2005. Experts do not generally consider Russia to be a democracy, citing purges and jailing of political opponents, curtailed press freedom, and the lack of free and fair elections. In 2004, Freedom House warned that Russia's retreat from freedom marks a low point not registered since 1989, when the country was part of the Soviet Union. The Economist Intelligence Unit has rated Russia as authoritarian since 2011, whereas it had previously been considered a hybrid regime, with some form of democratic government in place as late as 2007. According to political scientist Larry Diamond, writing in 2015, no serious scholar would consider Russia today a democracy. Personal image. Putin cultivates an outdoor, sporty, tough guy public image, demonstrating his physical prowess and taking part in unusual or dangerous acts, such as extreme sports and interaction with wild animals, part of a public relations approach that, according to Wired, deliberately cultivates the macho, take-charge superhero image. For example, in 2007, the tabloid Komsomolskaya Pravda published a huge photograph of a shirtless Putin vacationing in the Siberian mountains under the headline, "Be like Putin." Numerous Kremlinologists have accused Putin of seeking to create a cult of personality around himself, an accusation that the Kremlin has denied. Some of Putin's activities have been criticized for being staged. Outside of Russia, his macho image has been the subject of parody. Putin is believed to be self-conscious about his height, which has been estimated by Kremlin insiders at between 155 centimeters, 5 feet 2 in, and 165 centimeters, 5 feet 5 in, tall, but is usually given at 170 centimeters, 5 feet 7 in. There are many songs about Putin, and Putin's name and image are widely used in advertisement and product branding. Among the Putin-branded products are Putinka vodka, the Putin brand of canned food, the Gorbusha patina caviar, and a collection of T-shirts with his image. In 2015, his advisor Mikhail Lesin was found dead after days of excessive consumption of alcohol, though this was later ruled an accident. Publication recognition in the United States. In 2007, he was the Time Person of the Year. In 2015, he was number 1 on the Time's Most Influential People list. Forbes ranked him the world's most powerful individual every year from 2013 to 2016. He was ranked the second most powerful individual by Forbes in 2018. Putinisms. Putin has produced many aphorisms and catchphrases known as Putinisms. Many of them were first made during his annual Q&A conferences, where Putin answered questions from journalists and other people in the studio, as well as from Russians throughout the country, who either phoned in or spoke from studios and outdoor sites across Russia. Putin is known for his often tough and sharp language, often alluding to Russian jokes and folk sayings. Putin sometimes uses Russian criminal jargon, known as fenya, in Russian, albeit not always correctly. Personal life. Family. On the 28th of July 1983, Putin married Lyudmila Skrebneva, and they lived together in East Germany from 1985 to 1990. They have 2 daughters, Maria Patina, born the 28th of April 1985 in Leningrad, and Yekaterina Patina, born the 31st of August 1986 in Dresden, East Germany. An investigation by Proec Media in 2020 alleged that Putin has another daughter, Yelizaveta, born 2003, with Svetlana Krivonogeek. In April 2008, the Moskovsky Correspondent reported that Putin had divorced Lyudmila and was engaged to marry rhythmic gymnast Alina Kabava. The story was denied and the newspaper was shut down shortly thereafter. Putin and Lyudmila continued to make public appearances together as spouses, while the status of his relationship with Kabava became a topic of speculation. In the subsequent years, there were frequent reports that Putin and Kabava had multiple children together, although these unsubstantiated reports were denied. On 6 June 2013, Putin and Lyudmila announced that their marriage was over, and, on 1 April 2014, the Kremlin confirmed that the divorce had been finalized. In 2015, Kabava reportedly gave birth to a daughter. Putin is alleged to be the father. In 2019, Kabava reportedly gave birth to twin sons by Putin. Putin has 2 grandsons, born in 2012 and 2017. His cousin, Igor Putin, was a director at Moscow-based Master Bank and was accused in a number of money laundering scandals. Personal wealth. Official figures released during the legislative election of 2007 put Putin's wealth at approximately 3.7 million rubles, 150,000 United States dollars, in bank accounts, a private 77.4 square meter, 833 square feet apartment in Saint Petersburg, and miscellaneous other assets. Putin's reported 2006 income totaled 2 million rubles, approximately $80,000. In 2012, Putin reported an income of 3.6 million rubles, $113,000. Putin has been photographed wearing a number of expensive wristwatches, collectively valued at $700,000, nearly 6 times his annual salary. Putin has been known on occasion to give watches valued at thousands of dollars as gifts to peasants and factory workers. According to Russian opposition politicians and journalists, Putin secretly possesses a multi-billion-dollar fortune via successive ownership of stakes in a number of Russian companies. According to one editorial in The Washington Post, Putin might not technically own these 43 aircraft, but, as the sole political power in Russia, he can act like they're his. Russian RIA journalist argued that Western intelligence agencies could not find anything. These contradictory claims were analyzed by Polygraph.info, which looked at a number of reports by Western Anders Asland estimate of $100-160 billion, and Russian Stanislav Belkovsky estimated of $40 billion, analysts, CIA, estimate of $40 billion in 2007, as well as counter-arguments of Russian media. In April 2016, 11 million documents belonging to Panamanian law firm Mossack Fonseca were leaked to the German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung and the Washington-based International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. The name of Vladimir Putin does not appear in any of the records, and Putin denied his involvement with the company. However, various media have reported on 3 of Putin's associates on the list. According to the Panama Papers leak, close trusted associates of Putin own offshore companies worth $2 billion in total. The German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung regards the possibility of Putin's family profiting from this money as plausible. According to the paper, the $2 billion had been secretly shuffled through banks and shadow companies linked to Putin's associates, such as construction billionaires Arkady and Boris Rotenberg, and Bank Rossiya, previously identified by the U.S. State Department as being treated by Putin as his personal bank account, had been central in facilitating this. It concludes that Putin has shown he is willing to take aggressive steps to maintain secrecy and protect such communal assets. A significant proportion of the money trail leads to Putin's best friend Sergey Roldugin. Although a musician, and in his own words, not a businessman, it appears he has accumulated assets valued at $100 million, and possibly more. It has been suggested he was picked for the role because of his low profile. There have been speculations that Putin, in fact, owns the funds, and Roldugin just acted as a proxy. Garry Kasparov said, Putin controls enough money, probably more than any other individual in the history of human race. Residences. Official government residences. As president and prime minister, Putin has lived in numerous official residences throughout the country. These residences include the Moscow Kremlin, Novo Ogaryovo in Moscow Oblast, Gorky 9 near Moscow, Bocharov Rushi in Sochi, Dolgie Borody in Novgorod Oblast, and Riviera in Sochi. In August 2012, critics of Putin listed the ownership of 20 villas and palaces, 9 of which were built during Putin's 12 years in power. Personal residences. Soon after Putin returned from his KGB service in Dresden, East Germany, he built a dacha in Solovyovka on the eastern shore of Lake Komsomolskoye on the Karelian Isthmus in Pryersky district of Leningrad Oblast, near Saint Petersburg. After the dacha burned down in 1996, Putin built a new one identical to the original and was joined by a group of 7 friends who built dachas nearby. In 1996, the group formally registered their fraternity as a cooperative society, calling it Ozero, Lake, and turning it into a gated community. A massive Italianate-style mansion costing an alleged $1 billion and dubbed Putin's Palace, is under construction near the Black Sea village of Praskoviivka. In 2012, Sergey Kolesnikov, a former business associate of Putin's, told the BBC's Newsnight program that he had been ordered by Deputy Prime Minister Igor Sechin to oversee the building of the palace. He also said that the mansion, built on government land and sporting 3 helipads, a private road paid for from state funds and guarded by officials wearing uniforms of the official Kremlin Guard service, have been built for Putin's private use. Putin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov dismissed Kolesnikov's allegations against Putin as untrue, saying that Putin has never had any relationship to this palace. On the 19th of January 2021, 2 days after Alexei Navalny was detained by Russian authorities upon his return to Russia, a video investigation by him in the Anti-Corruption Foundation was published accusing Putin of using fraudulently obtained funds to build the estate for himself in what he called the world's biggest bribe. In the investigation, Navalny said that the estate is 39 times the size of Monaco and cost over 100 billion rubles, $1.35 billion, to construct. It also showed aerial footage of the estate via a drone and a detailed floor plan of the palace that Navalny said was given by a contractor, which he compared to photographs from inside the palace that were leaked onto the internet in 2011. He also detailed an elaborate corruption scheme allegedly involving Putin's inner circle that allowed Putin to hide billions of dollars to build the estate. Pets. Putin has received 5 dogs from various nation leaders: Connie, Buffy, Yumi, Verny and Pasha. Connie died in 2014. It is unknown what happened to the Putin family's previous two poodles, Tosia and Rodeo. Religion. Putin is Russian Orthodox. His mother was a devoted Christian believer who attended the Russian Orthodox Church, while his father was an atheist. Though his mother kept no icons at home, she attended church regularly, despite government persecution of her religion at that time. His mother secretly baptized him as a baby, and she regularly took him to services. According to Putin, his religious awakening began after a serious car crash involving his wife in 1993, and a life-threatening fire that burned down their dacha in August 1996. Shortly before an official visit to Israel, Putin's mother gave him his baptismal cross, telling him to get it blessed. Putin states, "I did as she said and then put the cross around my neck. I have never taken it off since." When asked in 2007 whether he believes in God, he responded, "There are things I believe, which should not in my position, at least, be shared with the public at large for everybody's consumption because that would look like self-advertising or a political striptease." Putin's rumored confessor is Russian Orthodox Bishop Tikhon Shevchenov. However, the sincerity of his Christianity has been rejected by his former advisor Sergey Pugachev. Sports. Putin watches football and supports FC Zenit Saint Petersburg. He displays an interest in ice hockey and bandy. Putin has been practicing judo since he was 11 years old, before switching to sambo at the age of 14. He won competitions in both sports in Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. He was awarded 8th Dan of the Black Belt in 2012, becoming the first Russian to achieve the status. Putin also practices karate. He co-authored a book entitled Judo with Vladimir Putin in Russian, and Judo, History, Theory, Practice in English. Benjamin Witz, a black belt in Taekwondo and Aikido and editor of Lawfare, has disputed Putin's martial arts skills, stating that there is no video evidence of Putin displaying any real noteworthy judo skills. This audio uses material from the Wikipedia article Vladimir Putin n.wikipedia.org/wiki/Vladimir_Putin, which is released under the license Creative Commons. Attribution Share Alike 3.0 Unported. CC by SA 3.0 creativecommons.org/licenses/by SA/3.0